She was clearly a sharpshooting assassin who never missed, yet in front of her husband, Jane pretended she couldn't handle a gun and deliberately missed every shot. But she didn't expect her husband John to grin mischievously, then pick up an air rifle and show off his skills. As John hit the target again and again, the relaxed smile on Jane's face slowly faded. John's showing off instantly triggered Jane's competitive spirit, and without hesitation she raised the air rifle again and hit every target with perfect precision in the blink of an eye. John was stunned on the spot. But what Jane didn't expect was that John, just like her, was also a top-tier assassin. 2 months earlier in Colombia, John was waiting in a hotel for his assassination target when he suddenly heard gunshots, and moments later a large group of officers rushed inside and started questioning guests, staying alone. Soon, the solitary John was targeted by the police. At the same time, Jane, who was also staying at the hotel, hurried into the hotel lobby. Facing the officers' questioning, Jane cast a tender look at John across the room, and John instantly understood, quickly hiding the pistol tucked at his waist before pulling Jane into his room under the excuse that she was his girlfriend. Just like that, two strangers meeting for the first time cleverly escaped the police search. Although neither knew the other's background, under the influence of alcohol, the two lonely strangers soon fell into each other's arms. Their synchronized breathing and the heartbeat they could feel with just a touch made them instantly realize that the person in front of them was the soulmate they had been searching for. 6 weeks later, they had a flash wedding. Soon 6 years passed in the blink of an eye, and the once inseparable couple no longer had the passion they once shared. Because they both hid their true identities, their relationship grew increasingly distant as they could never open their hearts to each other. Silence became the norm, and they had stopped caring about each other's interests.
If you don't like him, we can take him back.
Okay, I don't like him.
You'll get used to him.
That night, after receiving a sudden mission order, Jane put on a black outfit and told John she needed to go back to the office to deal with some business. John, long used to her excuses, didn't ask further and simply reminded her not to miss the upcoming gathering at the neighbor's house. Jane then took a ride to a hotel. John wasn't idle either, and as soon as Jane left, he drove to an underground casino alone. After layers of security checks, Jane was escorted by a burly man to a suite on the top floor. Meanwhile, the slightly drunk John wandered into a random room, where a gambling session was underway, and the wealthy John was immediately treated like a walking cash machine and pulled into the game. On the other side, after waiting for a long time, Jane finally met the crime boss who had arranged the meeting. She calmly removed her coat, took off her hairpin, let her brown hair fall freely, and even played a few provocative games with the boss. But just when the crime boss was completely relaxed, Jane suddenly revealed her true intentions.
Have you been selling big guns to bad people?
She calmly put her coat back on, hooked the ring of her handbag onto the balcony light fixture, and leaped off the rooftop from hundreds of meters above. Then she got into a taxi and elegantly left the scene. As for John, after losing all his cash, the man who was supposed to join the gambling session finally arrived. John quickly drew the 2 pistols at his waist and eliminated everyone at the table within seconds. It turned out he hadn't come to have fun, and killing everyone at the table was his true objective. Half an hour later, the Smiths reunited and showed up at their neighbor's door with cheerful smiles as if nothing had happened. But the moment John and Jane returned home, they instantly reverted to the distant couple they had become. Late that night, they each received calls from their respective agencies, and as always, they hid the truth from each other. Jane claimed it was just her father calling to check on her, while John said there was a problem with the dam he managed and he needed to travel to Atlanta for a few days. Early the next morning, John pulled his suitcase to the storage shed in the corner of the yard. Under the metal hatch inside the shed was John's secret weapons cache, neatly filled with guns, ammo, and stacks of cash he needed for missions. The moment John's car engine started, the supposedly sleeping Jane immediately sat up. She went to the kitchen and entered a code into the oven, and a small weapons storage box filled with guns and knives rose into view. John didn't go to Atlanta either, but returned to the office to check the mission details. After verifying the identity information, he learned that the assassination target was a prisoner named Benjamin. Meanwhile, Jane also arrived at her agency and received her new mission order. Strangely, her assassination target was the exact same person as John's. Because Benjamin would be escorted by the FBI and enter the United States by land, the desert road along the US-Mexico border was the best ambush location. Jane arrived early, planting high-powered explosives along the route. While she lay casually in the observation post waiting for the target convoy, John suddenly drove an off-road vehicle straight into her minefield, knocking over a sensor post and even stopping to relieve himself nearby. Although annoyed, Jane assumed John was just a random passerby. At that moment, the convoy escorting Benjamin approached the minefield, but to Jane's shock, the passerby John pulled out a rocket launcher from his back seat. Realizing she had been tricked, Jane immediately raised her rifle and opened fire on John. Luckily, John was wearing body armor and barely survived. Only then did John realize there was another assassin at the scene, so he changed his target and aimed the rocket launcher at Jane's observation post. But the explosion triggered the minefield's countdown early, causing the blast to occur before the convoy even entered. Completely ruining John's mission. Back at the office, John brought the computer fragments he had collected and had the hacker scan the remaining chip, only to discover the delivery address matched Jane's company. Thinking about the escaping female assassin, John suddenly had a bad feeling. Meanwhile, Jane reviewed the surveillance footage repeatedly and noticed that the male assassin's posture looked very similar to her husband John. After hiding their secrets for 6 years, both were suddenly on the brink of being exposed. That night, when they returned home, John and Jane began testing each other.
You're home early.
I missed you.
I missed you too.
They appeared calm, but the moment Jane turned around, John immediately emptied the wine in his glass. Sitting at the dining table, John discreetly hid a butter knife, but Jane then returned with an even bigger knife, startling John into quickly volunteering to cut the meat. Before he could finish, Jane pulled another long knife from her waist, and the steak Jane cooked caused even more trouble for John, who chewed so hard his jaw almost locked, yet the piece of beef still refused to go down, and he eventually spat it out. To change the situation of always being on the defensive, John decided to strike first. He lifted the wine bottle and poured Jane a full glass of red wine, then took advantage of her distraction and deliberately let the bottle slip from his hand. That single instinctive reaction was enough to confirm John's suspicion. Although Jane reacted quickly and immediately threw away the bottle in her hand, it was still too late. John sprinted to the study to grab a handgun, while Jane jumped into her car and sped away from the house. Seeing this, John rushed out as fast as he could, wanting to confront Jane face to face, but he was still one step too late. Unwilling to give up, John took a shortcut and ran through several neighbors' yards. But in a moment of carelessness, the gun went off, and the bullet struck the windshield of Jane's car. This made the already conflicted Jane instantly furious, and she slammed the accelerator, crashing straight toward John as he tried to explain. But even then, John continued trying to explain to her, yet the enraged Jane had no intention of giving him a chance. John had no choice but to smash the window and climb into the car, but in the next second, Jane forced herself out of the moving vehicle. With nowhere else to go, John sought comfort from his colleague Eddie, but the sudden truth still kept him awake all night. At the same time, Jane, who returned to her office to spend the night, also experienced a sleepless night, and even drinking an entire bottle of strong liquor couldn't numb her from what had just happened. Early the next morning, Jane led her team in a full sweep of the house. When John finally returned, he discovered that his secret armory had been completely emptied by Jane. Overcome with anger, John swung his fist at the air. Since Jane had already made the first move, he had no choice but to respond. So he quietly infiltrated the headquarters of Jane's company. But the security system detected him immediately, and Jane ordered her team to destroy all important documents at once. When John entered the building from above, Jane had already used a customized nail gun to secure a cable to the building across from them. Although John had plenty of chances to fire, he still couldn't bring himself to shoot her and could only watch as Jane escaped before his eyes. Unwilling to give up, John searched the incinerator and found a partially burned scrap of paper that revealed Jane's backup hideout. John then disguised himself as a construction engineer and quietly boarded the lift heading to the upper floors of an unfinished skyscraper. But the elevator suddenly stopped halfway up the tower. It turned out the burnt fragment in the incinerator was a trap Jane had laid to lure John in. Seeing her husband caught in her plan on the surveillance screen, Jane finally showed a satisfied smile. But even trapped like a bird in a cage, John still refused to admit defeat.
Go on, blow it.
You think I won't?
I think you won't.
Okay. 5, 4. Any last words?
The new curtains are hideous.
Jane originally only wanted to argue with him, but unexpectedly her subordinate actually pressed the button. The elevator cables were cut by an explosive charge, sending the lift crashing straight to the bottom at extreme speed. Jane immediately jumped out of the command vehicle parked at the construction site, but it was already too late. That night, Jane returned alone to the hotel where John had proposed to her, and her tears had already soaked her cheeks. While Jane was lost in memories of their past, a pair of familiar hands refilled her wineglass. The sadness in Jane's heart instantly melted away. It turned out that John had already anticipated Jane's actions. After spotting the surveillance camera, he used specialized equipment to feed footage of the exploding elevator into the video of the elevator he was actually in. Since John was completely unharmed, their game had to continue. So John invited Jane to dance with him, and they immediately began another round of subtle tests. John feinted beautifully and removed the knife strapped to Jane's thigh. And Jane instantly countered by unholstering the pistol from John's ankle. Then they even began analyzing the reasons their marriage had fallen apart. John accused Jane of using their marriage as a cover for her real identity, but Jane told John that he was the one who had been running away all along. At that moment, Jane suddenly turned away and ran toward the bathroom on the second floor. But John knew it wouldn't be that simple. Sure enough, the moment Jane entered the bathroom, it exploded. Just as John prepared to go upstairs to search for her, Jane had already blended into the crowd and walked away elegantly. When John rushed outside, an elderly man nearby told him he heard a ticking sound on John's body. Sensing danger, John immediately removed his jacket and tossed it into a trash bin. The next second, flames burst out of the bin. It seemed Jane truly intended to eliminate him. Enraged, John hijacked a car and sped straight toward their home. He then called Jane and told her to return home for their final confrontation. But after calming down, John called her again. He told Jane he had never treated her as a cover, and that marrying her was simply because he loved her. Although Jane felt the same, she still pretended to be indifferent. She told John that he was the most handsome target she had ever seen. This meant their final showdown was unavoidable. Soon John arrived outside their home, only for Jane to crash her car straight into his from the opposite direction. She then drove ahead of him and rushed into the garage. John had no choice but to abandon the car and quietly slip into the backyard, but Jane was already waiting at the door with a rifle in hand. John had no choice but to find another route, carefully breaking a second-floor window and climbing inside after making sure the room was empty. He retrieved the handgun hidden behind a painting and cautiously moved toward the staircase. Naturally cautious, John used a mirror to check the blind spot near the stairs, but in the next second, Jane nearly blasted his head off with a shotgun. John pretended to be hit, then quickly rose to fight back. Jane, with superior firepower, fired through the walls, yet John dodged each shot gracefully. At that moment, John accidentally knocked over a teacup while trying to flank her. Although he managed to catch the cup, the lid still fell to the floor. Hearing his location, Jane unleashed another barrage of gunfire. With nowhere left to retreat, John dove into the kitchen. Fortunately, the refrigerator was sturdy enough to block Jane's shots with ease, but John had run out of bullets. He opened a drawer, grabbed a kitchen knife, and hurled it toward Jane. Then, he yanked off the gas line, and when Jane fired again, after reloading, flames burst across the kitchen. John seized the moment to leap out of the kitchen and engage Jane in close combat. John, who should have had the advantage in strength, was unexpectedly struck in the head by Jane. They fought through more than a dozen rounds and remained evenly matched. At a critical moment, they reached for the guns on the floor at the same time. But after locking eyes, John couldn't bring himself to shoot, and was the first to lower his weapon.
Don't! Come on!
Seeing Jane's tear-filled eyes, John gently pushed her gun aside. The next moment, they held each other tightly. Even though they had nearly taken each other's lives, this was their way of finally opening their hearts. When the neighbors arrived with the police after hearing the gunshots, the couple who had been engaged in a fierce confrontation moments earlier had already completely reconciled. Time quickly moved to the next morning. Just as they were enjoying breakfast among the ruins, several smoke grenades suddenly shattered the peace inside the house. It turned out that their organization had only given them 48 hours to eliminate each other. Since neither of them completed the mission, their organization sent assassins to carry out punishment. With their ammunition completely depleted, Jane and John had no choice but to hide in the basement. But the assassins ignored all rules and even used a robot to drop a bomb into the basement. Fortunately, John reacted fast and kicked the bomb under a barrel of oil. Jane and John, with no way out, had no choice but to fight their way through with everything they had. Moments later, the house that was already in ruins was completely flattened by the explosion. After that, they took the neighbor's minivan and fled the scene at high speed. But just as they entered the highway, a second wave of assassins caught up to them. So they quickly switched seats, and John, finally free to fight, launched a counterattack. But at the critical moment, John suddenly confessed to Jane that he had been married once before. Jane, furious in an instant, slammed on the brakes. At that moment, one of the assassins climbed out of the sunroof of the car behind them. So John swung the golf club and knocked him out, then pulled the pin on the grenade strapped to his chest. In the blink of an eye, the first vehicle was reduced to ashes, but Jane and John continued their round of confessions. Jane told John she had been an orphan since childhood. Meanwhile, the remaining two cars continued chasing them relentlessly. Seeing that John still couldn't get a clean shot, Jane drifted the car into a sharp turn and fired several rounds, blowing up both fuel tanks with perfect accuracy. Afterward, they went to John's colleague Eddie for help, but Eddie advised them to split up and run on their own, saying that was the only chance to survive. Unless they could find Benjamin, the drug lord who was being hunted by both companies, and maybe then the bosses might spare them. So Jane secretly contacted her former assistant, and with her help, they located the place where Benjamin was being held. Then they began the first joint mission of their lives as assassins. Although they were both top killers in their own companies, their working styles were completely different, and they had absolutely no chemistry. But with their exceptional skills, they still managed to capture Benjamin from the heavily guarded facility. But after questioning him, they realized that this so-called drug lord was only a rookie who had just joined the assassin organization. He was merely a decoy planted by both companies, and John and Jane were the true targets. Months earlier, the two rival assassin companies discovered that their top agents were actually married to each other, so they cooperated and created this plan to eliminate them. Each company assigned them to assassinate the same target, believing John and Jane would fight each other to the death. If Benjamin was the bait, then kidnapping him was the trap deliberately prepared for them. After searching him, John found a tracking device hidden in Benjamin's belt. At that moment, the assassin organization's convoy arrived outside. Luckily, John and Jane were prepared and escaped into a nearby sewer, avoiding capture once again. At this point, they had both prepared their own escape routes, but splitting up now might mean saying goodbye forever. After a serious discussion, they decided they would no longer run away. John and Jane then infiltrated the shopping mall next door and prepared for a direct confrontation with their companies. They put on bulletproof vests, checked their weapons, and used the terrain to wage a guerrilla battle. Not only had John's hammer skills improved, but Jane's mastery of throwing knives had reached perfection. She not only eliminated several assassins with a single strike each, but also accidentally drove a knife straight into John's thigh. Naturally, he didn't dare complain about his wife's mistake and quietly pulled the fruit knife out before moving on. But the moment he turned around, a rain of bullets poured toward them. They could only fire while retreating, using the mall's layout to continue the fight. John moved clockwise to draw fire, while Jane climbed onto a shelf to snipe the assassins from a distance. But soon, Jane's exposed position was overwhelmed by enemy fire and she fell to the ground. At the critical moment, John rode in on a stolen dirt bike. Jane quickly recovered and unleashed the 6-barrel Gatling mounted on the dirt bike, mowing down the assassins. But there were simply too many of them, and their dirt bike was soon sent flipping over by an incoming RPG. But top-tier assassins never give up easily. In a life-or-death moment, John and Jane chose to trust each other completely and fight back to back. They used each other as their center point, standing together and entering their ultimate battle against the assassins. To protect the person they loved most, they did not back down even in such a desperate moment. With perfect cooperation, they finally defeated every assassin. Afterward, John and Jane successfully left their companies behind and started a brand new life.